advising all airlines flying to Sochi to be especially concerned about the potential for explosives being hidden in toothpaste or cosmetic tubes as the folks are arriving over the next day or two in Sochi, the Winter Olympic Games. The opening ceremony is Friday. We're less than 48 hours away from that. Mitt Romney, who was in charge of the Winter Olympic Games in Salt Lake City back in 2002, the Republican presidential nominee, is still with us. It seems to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Governor Romney, based on what we just heard from Peter King of the House Homeland Security Committee, it looks like this could be the most serious terror threat of any summer or winter Olympic Games on record.
Well, in terms of a pre-warned threat, I think you're right. Based on what we're hearing from Representative King, it calls into question the Russians' willingness to share information and to give us the kind of specificity or the kind of weighing of credibility that normally would be associated with threats of this nature. According to Representative King, that just hasn't been forthcoming, and that obviously is very concerning. If in fact this story is one of this threat is a credible threat, you would ask yourself why you wouldn't insist that any flights going into Sochi or in the region would prohibit any kind of tubes of toothpaste or anything else, gels, liquids, and so forth, to make sure that this threat couldn't possibly be carried out.
And remember that the Boston Marathon bombers were from Dagestan, which is not far away at all. So this is a very troubled region to begin with, which makes a lot of us wonder what were they thinking when they decided to put the Winter Olympic Games in Sochi, 7 years or so ago. And when I say this was maybe the worst pre-Olympic game threat, we all remember what happened in 1972 at the Munich Summer Olympic Games when 11 Israeli athletes were kidnapped and then killed in that botched rescue operation. Bottom line right now, based on what you know, you still think it's okay for Americans to go?
The answer is, for those of us who love the Olympics and love the experience and want to see the athletes compete, it's something I would feel safe in doing. I'd take my family to do. At the same time, I think given the specificity of the threats and the degree of danger in the neighborhood, you're going to be a little concerned. And the fact that these new revelations are coming forward now with regards to specific threats on the toothpaste source, why that gives you some real concern. I don't think there's any way around that, and I do understand why someone like Congressman King says he wouldn't go, take his family there. But frankly, given my love of Olympic sport and the athletes, I would do that if my schedule allowed it.
I remember vividly, it's almost 2 years ago, March 2012, you and I sat down for an interview. We spoke about U.S.-Russian relations, and at the time, you got a lot of grief for suggesting that, in your opinion at that time, Russia, and you called Russia our #1 geopolitical foe, as you well recall. The whole relationship with Putin right now, give us your sense. Those comments then, a lot of people probably think you may be right. You may have been right, even though you were criticized pretty severely at the time. Give us your sense on this U.S.-Russian relationship, specifically with Putin.
Well, I don't think there's any question but that Russia, under Putin's leadership, has been our political adversary on the world stage and has tried to block the kind of tough sanctions we thought were essential early on in Iran. They finally made some concessions on that front. The nuclear deal they worked out is very one-sided, in my view, towards Russia. Of course, harboring Edward Snowden is, in my view, a calculated effort to stick America in the eye. And right now, they're standing arm in arm with Assad in Syria. Most of the world is wishing he'd go away. I mean, Russia is not our best friend in terms of the politics on the world stage. And for that reason, among others, I think we have to recognize that we have not a military foe, not an enemy, but a nation that seems intent on pushing back against the United States and opposing us in whether it's the United Nations or in other places in the world where there is conflict. And but at this stage, given the fact they have the Olympics, and given the fact that we have athletes and spectators there, we'd hope they'd put those kinds of political issues aside and collaborate entirely and fully so we can understand the extent of this threat and we can take corrective action as necessary.
We're going to get back to the breaking news in a few moments. We've got more guests coming up. Our reporters are on the scene. We're going back to Sochi. But while I have you, Governor Romney, a few political questions because it's been on the minds of a lot of folks over the past few weeks. Would you consider running for president a third time in 2016?
No, I've answered that question a number of times, as you know, and the answer is no. I'm not running for president in 2016. It's the time for someone else to take that responsibility, and I'll be supporting our nominee, and there's some very good people who are taking a very good look at that race.
A lot of people are wondering, maybe you might change your mind. Look at some of these recent polls in New Hampshire. These are Republicans. Poll came out who would be your choice for the 2016 Republican presidential nominee. Romney, 25%, Rand Paul, 18%, Chris Christie, 17%, Jeb Bush, 13%, Ted Cruz, 7%. And then there was a poll that came out a little bit earlier in November, and this was a Washington Post ABC News poll, registered voters nationwide. If the election were today, this was a year after the election, would you vote for Obama? 45%, Romney 49%. So you see those numbers, you see some of the folks out there in the Republican Party saying, well, Mitt Romney, maybe you should reconsider. What say you?
Well, I appreciate the compliment. It's better than a kick in the teeth. At the same time, I'm absolutely convinced that there are other people who would have a better chance of becoming the nominee and becoming the next president of the United States better than I would have. I've had my turn. I gave it 2 good shots, didn't win, and now it's time for someone else to do it. So I'm not running for president, Wolf. I made that clear from, I think, the morning after the last loss.
The other reason I'm old enough to remember it, so are you. Ronald Reagan tried 3 times. He got it on the third. The third time was a charm for Ronald Reagan. So, this is America. You can always change your mind if you want. So if it's not going to be you on the Republican side, who do you want to be the Republican nominee?
Well, I don't intend to support somebody until they've actually gone through the process. And right now we got a very full group of people. Marco Rubio, Jeb Bush, Chris Christie, Rand Paul, Paul Ryan, of course, my running mate, an extraordinary man. John Kasich, governor of Ohio, doing a great job there. Scott Walker in Wisconsin. We've got a lot of very good people. Susana Martinez in New Mexico, I understand, is potentially looking at the race. I read that in the blogs. So I don't know how it's going to settle down. I didn't mention Mike Huckabee. Of course, Mike Huckabee, he ran before, did a fine job. He may be coming back and giving another shot. So, we'll let it settle down a bit and then finally coalesce behind the person who we think ought to be the next president.
Well, the last time you had to make a decision like this and you vetted a whole bunch of Republicans, you thought Paul Ryan, after you, was most qualified to be president of the United States. So you still believe that?
Well, I think Paul Ryan was the absolute right person for me to have as a vice president. And I say that because I was a governor. I had not had the kind of experience in Washington to know who I could trust there, who would get the job done, how the budget process would work most effectively. And Paul is not only a man of character and courage and vision, he's also a person of great experience. And that Washington experience combined with my experience leading it as a governor, I thought was a good combination. But in terms of who's the best person to be our nominee, I'm going to wait and make that decision a little later.
You believe Governor Chris Christie is telling us the truth?
Oh, I sure do. Chris is a friend of mine. Chris is a straightforward guy. When he tells you something, you can count on it. And I'm counting on Chris and believe that if he decides to get into national politics, he'll do very well indeed.
If